So hello everyone and welcome to this PractiTest webinar. My name is Joel and I'm PractiTest Chief Solution Architect. In today's webinar, I want to talk about a topic that we have been discussing, at least I have been discussing with a number of people around the community. And that is the fact that we are being asked, or even being, not really forced is the word, we are being compelled to start adding more and more developers into our testing projects and into our testing tasks. And I want to take a look with you into some of the issues and the best practices for how to do this in an efficient and in an effective way. Okay? Just a little bit, again, to get started. First of all, a little bit about me so that you know why you're listening to me and why should you suffer for the next 40 to 45 minutes. So I have been in testing for the last 22 years, based at least on this slide in here. Obviously, as everyone, I started as a tester, an accidental tester, joining the profession of testing during college, and becoming very quickly a tester, test manager, test lead. I worked in a number of companies, both in Israel, where I'm located right now, as well as in the US, smaller and large organizations as well. I became a QA manager, a consultant around testing, and I also blogging my personal blog as well, speaking in a number of conferences and presentations worldwide. And my work today is at a company called PractiTest, a pretty cool company, and I will talk a little bit more about it in a couple of seconds, where I am the Chief Solution Architect, meaning I try to help the company to create a better product that actually matches our customer needs. And I also manage all of the testing and QA operations within the company. Around other testing stuff or projects that I have and I like to manage or are close to my heart are both of them the State of Testing survey and report that runs once a year around the beginning of the year. And if you haven't heard of it and you want to learn more about it, send me an email. I'll be happy to point you to the right direction on that. And also the online testing conference, which is, as the name implies, and I will talk a little bit more about it in a couple of seconds, a totally free online test conference for everyone who wants to join, speak, or learn more about testing. As I mentioned, just to give a couple of words out, PractiTest, the company that I work with, and the one that is sponsoring this session, PractiTest is a pretty cool SaaS QA management solution. We provide a very simple, intuitive application that is also very professional and flexible. If you don't have a QA management system or you're not happy with the QA management system you have, I really suggest you should go and check PractiTest. It integrates very well with tons of other systems. And again, it has one of the best supports that we've seen around the business. I usually don't do this, but we have been adding some pretty cool features lately, and I do want to give a shout to them so that you know what to check out. If you're working with PractiTest, you can take a look into them. If you're not working with PractiTest, when you evaluate the system, go ahead and take a look into it. First and foremost, I think that one of the biggest points of PractiTest is the dashboards and the approach that we have for information in general, where we're really, really trying to help you provide as much inputs and data to your team on the stuff that you're doing on your testing cycles. But we also added some pretty cool new features. We have a new exploratory testing module that we're even improving as we speak. And we just added a couple of weeks ago a new task work/Kanban module to help you manage your testing process. So again, just a shout out, if you want to take a look into PractiTest, you're more than welcome. We have a 2-week free evaluation license, and I'll be happy to provide any additional information that you may want to get. And this is the last you will hear about PractiTest, because we're here to talk testing and not so much about a product. The second thing that I mentioned, and again, because we're really, really getting close to it, one of the problems that I saw, one of the things that I really, really like is taking part in testing conferences. And again, I try to go as much as I can. I'm going to be personally in Star West in a couple of weeks. I'm going to be in Eurostar, and I try to participate in as many conferences as I can. But not everyone is as fortunate that the company they work with actually pays them for this. And it's very, very hard for most people out there to go to any testing conference. And so a couple of years ago, I came to my team and we actually came up with an idea of having a totally free online testing conference that it's exactly like the regular conference we attend, but it's going to be 100% online. And even though you're thinking, yeah, I know that the STAR conference actually transmit part of their sessions online, it's still not the same thing because the conversation takes part within the system, within the conferences, and everyone who's offline basically is not taking part of the conversation. So here we're doing it a little bit different. I do invite you to go ahead and first of all sign up. It's totally free, and you can see all the sessions that you have in there. The next conference is going to be at the end of November, and you can just go to www.onlinetestconf.com and sign up. I'm sorry to say that the call for papers was actually closed, I think, today or 2 days ago. But if you still have a pretty cool idea, you will have my email address at the end of the session, and I'll be happy to take a look into it. And if it's worth it, then we might be able to just push it in. But again, we do invite people who want to listen, people who want to hear, to take part of the testing community worldwide with the online test conf. Okay? But enough about stuff that is not related to the topic today. So let's actually start talking about what we came here to talk about. And that is the point of how can we include developers effectively as part of our testing efforts and as part of our testing projects. Now, as I mentioned, this is not something that is coming out of thin air. I think that it's a process that has been evolving as time goes by. I remember, again, even as long as 20 years ago when we were having issues towards the end of the project where our managers used to come and say, hey, you know what, you have a bunch of developers doing nothing. Why don't you go and add them into your testing projects? And the first thought is, yes, it makes sense. But the second thought immediately was that these guys are not going to be able to test. And even if they are going to be able to test, they're not going to be able to test as well as we do. Okay. Now, as we start moving more and more into agile processes and DevOps approaches, then we see that this is not only something that is more common, but it has become a reality. Even more so when we find ourselves as testers in smaller teams, where the intrinsic thought is that it's not only that you don't want to do all of your testing, you cannot do all of the testing, not even most of the testing. And so we need to start finding ways as testing professionals to include more and more developers and basically non-testers into our testing tasks. Okay, and this is what we're going to be talking about today. Now, the first thing that we need to do in order to start talking about this topic is basically to debunk a fact that sits very tightly in most people's minds, and that is the misconception that developers simply cannot test. Guys, developers not only can test, they actually test pretty cool and pretty well. It really depends on what you do, how do you help them in order to achieve these facts. Now, in order to start debunking these myths, if we want to, then we can understand a couple of things. First of all, if you look very, very deep into the way that you're testing, you will realize that testing is not really rocket science, okay? Fact of the matter is that we take interns and we teach them how to test. We take people who are maybe a little bit technical and we make them great testers. We can even take business analysts and turn them into excellent testers that we have in there. And these guys do not need to go over hundreds and hundreds of hours of training in order to become good testers or even great testers. It's something that, yes, you need to teach. It's something that, yes, you need to develop your skills. But it's very, very far from being rocket science. And given that most of our development peers are actually quite intelligent people, or at least we want to believe that they're not complete idiots, then I'm guessing that we will be able to teach them how to test. The second point that we need to understand is that developers are already testing as part of our teams. Now, what we have here is data out of our State of Testing report for 2018. This is a project that I'm actually part of. We have been running this survey for the last 5 years where we ask testers a ton of questions about stuff they do and how they do it and things happening in the organization. And one of the things that we ask them is what percentage of your testing is being done by non-testers within your organization? Now, obviously, the first thing that jumps to mind is that, well, for 56% of the people responding our survey, and again, this is thousands of people, then for these guys, it's less than 10%. We can even go as far as saying, hey, a little bit more than half the respondents, all of their testing is being done by testers. But that means that if we look at the rest of the picture, a little bit less than half, if you sum it up, it's about 43% of respondents or 44% of respondents, depending on the rounding that you do. They are still having other people doing testing. Yeah, well, 33%, a third of respondents says that it's between 10% and 50%. But we see about 10% of respondents says that half or all their testing is already being done by non-testers. Okay, so it's not only that developers can test, as I mentioned, developers are testing. And I think that these will be more and more evident as Agile really takes hold on the industry. I believe that as we move to DevOps and teams start adopting Agile correctly, because again, you can be doing Agile and not be doing it right. But if you're doing it correctly, where all the team is going to be taking care of all the aspects of the work of the team, then you will need to see more non-testers / developers doing testing, and we will need to start working with them in order to do it correctly. Okay? So if I didn't mention this before, the idea of this session today, it's not only to give all the reasons why developers cannot test. It's yes, to look into those as well, but to find the best way that we have in order to include developers and other non-testers into our testing tasks and to do it right. Okay? So I want to start, first of all, by touching on the point of why up to now, or why do we think, or why does people traditionally think that developers cannot test? And I want to put emphasis on this. It's not that developers don't test, it's that developers do not want to test. And again, in my personal experience, I remember hiring quite a lot of testers that they went into becoming developers later on their careers, and these guys are still great testers. So I don't think that it's as much that developers cannot test as the fact that developers really do not want to invest on their testing projects or testing tasks. Now, I already wrote about this on my blog that I mentioned before, so we will be sharing this presentation with everyone who actually signed up for this webinar. So you can go and read a little bit more. I'm not going to put everything on that blog posting here, but you can read a little bit more about what I wrote on this article here. But to sum it up, I think the developers do not want to test or cannot test because of a number of reasons. And the main ones might be, first of all, that if you look into the work of a developer, he or she will be focused on the positive scenario. Okay, a developer will look into a feature, and again, for the most part, obviously they need to look into every aspect, but in the most part, they will be focused on how do they create the positive scenario for what they want to achieve. How can we log into the system? How can we perform a specific feature? How can we do something in a positive way? They might be able, or they should be able to handle some of the negative scenarios, but if you look into it, it will be mostly on the positive scenarios and not so much on the negative scenarios of the equation here. Okay? The second thing, and it's very close to that, is that the work of a developer will be based on taking a very complex problem and breaking it down into very small and simple solutions, into units of solutions. Okay, so if you take the process of, hey, I need to create a new graph that will provide this and this information, a developer will need to take this complex problem and basically break it down into small areas or pieces of information or sub-processes that will help him or her actually come to the solution that we're talking about. Now, the work of a tester, it's the complete opposite of that. Whenever we look into a feature, the question that we'll look into is, okay, what can we do, or how can it be more complex in order to actually find the areas where this solution will actually not fit or where it will break? Okay, so we're looking into different, sometimes even opposites ways of working. Another issue that many developers have, and again, not every developer, obviously, many developers do have a very complete picture and understand the user scenarios, is that developers tend to miss the whole user scenario or the whole approach of the users. They are concentrated on how to develop the functionality they need to know, how to comply with the requirements that they've been asked to comply, whereas a tester will start always by looking into the user, trying to understand their behavior, And so trying to match the way that they're going to be working with the system in order to find if this behavior is fully supported on the system. Again, I remember a bug that we found, and it was not so much a bug in the product, it was mostly a bug on the requirements, where I remember working on a system that we realized it was very, very heavy inclined towards the use of the mouse. But we were actually working on applications that were being done for bank tellers. And if you know the work of a bank teller, and we were sent to bank tellers to work with them, these guys usually work only with the keyboards, or at least they used to work with the keyboards. I haven't been to a bank teller for ages. We use mostly ATMs now. But these guys were working very heavily with their keyboards. They were not using the mouse at all. And the application that we were working with basically depended on the mouse to do a lot of the process needed to be. So this is one of those cases where you can see that, yes, the developer actually used everything he has in his or her power to complete the feature, but they miss part of the user scenario by not understanding how the user actually works with that. Okay, so there was a part of the place that was missing. Another thing that we see or hear from developers quite a lot is that, hey, we don't really know how to test. We are not experts in testing, so if you give us something to test, we will test it wrong. And you know what? They're right. If you're not a trained tester, if you do not train how to test, then you will be able to run part of these scenarios, but you won't be able to test effectively. And maybe the last one, and one of the most important ones, is that in their heads, they have more important things to do than waste their time testing. And if that is your approach from the beginning, then you won't be able to test. Because if you think that you're basically wasting your time doing the operation that you're doing, you will not do it thoroughly. You will try to just get it done quickly, and you will not invest the time or the efforts in order to do it right. Okay? So for me, it's very important whenever we start working with developers on how to test, we'll try to understand where they're coming from, if they have some intrinsic issues that we need to work with. And I think that for everyone actually here, it's very important for them to understand which one of these points might be affecting their own developers, and it might be different for each one of them, in order to try to see how can you work with them in order to actually improve their testing skills. Just one second. There's a person here who is asking if we can send the URLs in the chat. We will do better than that. We'll just send the presentation for people who actually want to get it. Okay, so that way you will be able to get all that information. By the way, I also want to say, if you have any questions, we will have some Q&A time at the end. So if you have any questions, just go ahead and write them in the Q&A. If it's something that I can answer throughout the presentation, I will gladly do it. And if not, then we'll have about 5 minutes towards the end for that. Okay, so if we already know why developers cannot or maybe do not want to test, then how can we actually go about it? How can we help them to do it better? Then again here, again, sorry for that, but I already wrote a little bit about it, and I do want to bring some of those points in here. And I think that the most important point in here, regardless if the developer wants to test or sees the importance of his testing, or even if they don't want to test, the first point of business is that unless you get management to push for those developers to test, it simply won't happen. Okay, unless there's a management initiative that says, hey guys, testing is not something that we only the people from the testing team or only those who are testers within the team will do. Unless it is said that this is a team approach, then it simply won't happen. And we'll see it later on, because there's always other stuff that needs to happen. And unless you get a very, very big push from management, and obviously at the beginning it will be higher or bigger, and later on as this becomes part of your culture or your quality culture within the company, it will be less. But it needs to start from management. The higher in management, the better. The more serious these guys are, the better it will be. If management simply says, yes, well, everyone needs to test, but then when push comes to shove, they will push testing aside for other tests, then it won't be happening, right? So this is the first thing. Now, once you have backing from management, once everyone in the team understands that testing is part of their task, then you need to start helping them to do it better. The first thing that I really recommend whenever you're starting to work with developers on how to test is to do quite a lot of pair testing. these guys do want to know how you do it. For them, it's not that it's magic, but they don't really understand how you go about testing. How do you plan your test? How do you set up your test? How do you run your test? What do you do with the test that you're running? And if for you, it might sound like second nature because you're doing it all the time. It really helps not only to teach them, hey, let's do a frontal session. I will write on a whiteboard and you will see how I do it. It's even better if you start by doing quite a lot of pair testing sessions where you show them explicitly what you're doing. Do not do the pair testing only on the actual testing. If you can do pair testing when you're planning, when you're setting up, when you're reporting bugs, as much as you can show them, it will be better because they will see it pragmatically. They will see it exactly how you do it, and they will be able to ask questions and basically get more information out of it. It doesn't hurt also to create all sorts of type of help files for them. What I've seen that works very, very well is actually having checklists, maybe a list with heuristics listed on them. Checklists that will show you, hey, if you're working with languages, this is what you need to look into. If you're working with files, then try to work with empty files, with large files, with files from different types. Again, all sorts, as much information, as much basically guides as you can do. It will be better and make them handy for them. Okay, if they want to use it, make sure that it's not only hidden in a folder somewhere. Make sure that they can actually get to it and even suggest to them what they can do in each one of the cases. It's very important. Obviously, at the beginning, it's more important, but I like to do it all the time. Whenever a non-developer, even when a tester is actually doing it, make sure to assign time for a pre-briefing. Make sure that you can sit with that developer and say, hey, remember, this is what you're going to be doing. These are the things that you might be doing. Tell me what your plans are. Do a pre-briefing of the testing session that we'll be doing. And after they're done testing, do a post-review session of what they did. If they found something, look into that. Ask them what they tested. Try to bring up ideas of stuff that might have tested and they missed. All of those things when you do review sessions, just as when you're doing pairwise testing, these are lessons that are easier to catch and to absorb than if you do it on a theoretical basis. Okay, if you're talking about stuff they did and you give them feedback immediately after they're done with it, it will be easier for them to correct the ways that they're working and actually move forward or do it better the next time around. And as I mentioned, sometimes one of the biggest issues is that developers do not really understand the customer, or maybe they think they understand some of the customers, but they don't understand all of the customers. So it's very important to make sure that you review with them the case study, the user needs, the user background. Anything that for them might not be trivial and it might affect their testing, it's very important for you not to take it for granted and try to review it with them all the time. Okay, so if you want to start helping developers, this is the way to start. By the way, I see a number of questions here. Let me go them quickly. Is this session recorded? Yes, it's been recorded. Hopefully, we'll be able to share it with people. Resources around heuristics for developers and checklists. I think that I have some of them and we will be able to share them with people. And any resources for pair testing or for learning. I think that the best resource for pair testing with a developer is just sitting next to them, okay, and do it with them. At the beginning, again, remember, a pair testing exercise is an exercise where two people are testing, but there's only one keyboard and one mouse. So maybe at the beginning, you will be handling the keyboard and the mouse, but very quickly you should pass that to that developer, and they should be driving so that they can actually make those decisions, and you're basically the co-pilot helping to move it left or right and start doing stuff like that. Okay, so that's very, very important. Okay, so let's move forward a little bit, again, because we have quite a lot to cover. Now, it's not enough simply to train developers on how to test. We need to understand that there are going to be some test cases or some testing that it's easier for some developers to do, while some test cases that will be less easier for those developers to do. And so you need to constantly think and adapt what part of your testing you will want to provide to your testers and which one you will actually keep to yourself or to other testers and developers alike. Okay, so it's very important to adapt this. Now, when we talk about adapting, you need to take into account a couple of things. First of all, as much as possible, you need to look for cross-testing. Now, what's cross-testing? Cross-testing, once you realize it makes quite a lot of sense. If I am a developer of a specific area of the product, then maybe it's not the best idea for me to test that part of the product. Okay, if I'm going to be developing area A, I might want to go ahead and test area B or even product B. And the reason for that, again, there are quite a lot of reasons, but the two that actually comes more, again, strongly towards me is one of the things that I've heard someone call basically parental feelings towards the work. Basically, that means that when they're looking into the stuff that they're doing, they already made all sorts of decisions. They already feel responsible, and they already feel that this is what they have been doing. So it's going to be harder for them to look for issues, especially if you're talking about logical issues, maybe not necessarily bugs. It's not an exception that comes to mind, but okay, whether this should have been done this way or that way. So it's going to be harder for them to do it. If you look into it, there's also the notion of inattentional blindness. And intentional blindness means that I have been working with something for so long that even if there's something that it's buggy, that it shouldn't be there, I'm just going to be blind to that because I got used to that bug being in front of my screen. Okay, so as much as possible, basically what we're saying is you want to have a fresh pair of eyes to test something. If we're talking about the developer, it's better to have that person not testing the stuff that he found or that he wrote. Okay, and it may sound like something that is very logical for you guys, but if we miss this point, then it will be very easy for us to say to tell the developer, hey, you know what, you have a user story, go ahead and after you wrote it, go ahead and test it yourself, and we will basically be prompted to releasing quite a lot of bugs because it's not realistic. Meaning all the bugs that this developer already found or thought he could find, he already took them out as part of his development process. So we should have a separate person basically validating and testing the stuff that he or she did. In addition to this, when we're talking about adapting tests to your developers, I think that it's trivial, but we should actually make a formal effort to try to focus them on the type of testing that is going to be better for them. So you know what, first and foremost, do not sacrifice unit testing or integration testing. Any type of automation that you think might be done better by the developer, go ahead and ask him to do it or her to do it. If you're looking into more going over code and trying to do more research on that, again, those are the type of testing that these people are going to be better at doing that you might not be as technical as they are. Also, part of testing that we usually put on the side is going to be quite a lot of instrumentation. How can we make sure that whenever something goes into production, then it's going to continue reporting data. So that is something you might want to give to the developer, as well as testing in production. Hey, if you need to be parsing over logs of information and generating all sorts of alerts, these might be things that it's easier for them to do it than for you to do it. And these are still part of your testing tasks that someone needs to be doing. Okay, so it's better for you to try to find stuff for them that is going to be easier for you, for them to do than it's going to be for you. And in general, again, try to look at each person's strong and weak areas. For example, I know of a developer who's very, very good with languages. So we try to give them all sorts of localization areas. We have people who are extremely good with algorithms. So we try to give them to them. Obviously, a developer might be better at load testing and stress testing than you are. So anything that you can actually look for these people's strong and weak points. Try to be as forward as you can with that and provide them or basically to give them those tasks instead of you taking those tasks that might be better for them just because you think that they should be having the same tasks that you do. Okay, for every tester, try to match the stuff that they're stronger at. Now, it's not only about adapting your test case and understanding your developers, it's also about how do you plan and how do you prepare for your testing, especially if you're talking about people who might not really know how to test. And we talked about a number of these beforehand. But whenever we're doing test planning preparations, I really, really recommend that you make sure that all your user stories include testing risks and complete user scenarios, both positive as well as negative scenarios. Okay, and we're talking all the time that we want to make sure that our non-testers have as much information as possible. So if we're talking about agile projects where we have user stories and we have POs actually working on those user stories, let's actually get as much information as we can from them. Even if they think that it's trivial, let's make sure that it is included in our user story. If there are areas that we think are more risky, if we have, again, not only positive paths, but also negative paths or negative scenarios, let's make sure that these are included as part of our user stories. Whenever we give this user story to a developer, it will be easier for them to understand this and actually test better, just like you would do, or maybe in the same way that for you it's trivial, for them it's going to be at least known what they need to do as part of their testing. Now, one of the things that we think is that it's not a good idea to give developer test cases, just as I mentioned checklists. I also believe that it's good to have high-level test cases for all of your application areas. And so if you give a developer a task to go ahead and test something, give them those high-level test cases, give them high-level steps of how the system should look like, give them sanity tests, integration tests that are manual, try to make them as modular as possible. Again, don't take it for granted that these guys, or don't think that if you tell them, hey, this is the feature, that they will be able to go ahead and run an exploratory session that will be great and will cover as much the same way that you would do it. So just as a kid learning to ride a bike needs wheels next to the bike to help him on that, then these guys will need as much help as possible. So try to provide that in the way of high-level test cases, and as much as you can do it modular so that they don't need to even choose what to run. You can actually do it for them, create it, test it, and make sure that they're on their way testing correctly. The same goes for environments, okay? Try to create environments that include the data that they will need. If you let a developer go ahead and test, most times they will do it on a vanilla scenario or on an environment that only has some demo data. Why don't you create environments that have realistic data that will be able to provide them a realistic environment to find those bugs that they're looking for, okay? So in the same way that you prepare your test cases, make sure that you can prepare and share those environments with them. One of the things that I believe is critical is to make sure that, again, part of the test cases or testing that we'll be doing will be in the areas of the continuous integration and continuous deployment. So if you have any type of CI system, make sure that it's not only in place, but make sure that it's running smoothly. If every time that you run your CI is failing so that no one can actually make sure if you broke the build or didn't break the build, if the build is always broken, no one's going to fix it, okay? So if you already made the effort to have a CI or CD system in place, make sure that it's always green and people are treating it with the right level of seriousness so that everything's actually running smoothly and you can make a good use of it. Another point that is extremely important is going to be visibility. Again, it's not only about trusting your developers, it's to make sure that whenever they are running part of their task, then you will have full visibility into that. I think that with visibility comes accountability. And if everyone sees who's doing what, it's going to be easier for me to go ahead and do it. It's not like I'm going to be doing it because I have my scouts honor here. I'm doing it because my team's actually counting on me. And if there's full visibility into what I'm doing and obviously what I'm not doing, then it will be easier for people or for you to actually push the fact that everyone needs to do their part of the tasks. Okay, if I'm going to be giving my developers 2 testing tasks to do and they're not doing it, but the whole team actually sees that these guys became the bottleneck, they will feel more, let's say, prone to go ahead and run these test cases instead of just ignoring them completely. Okay, with visibility comes accountability. Remember that part. And obviously, and if we go back into the push from management, you need to make sure that testing becomes a formal part of the definition of done. Again, this goes mostly for our agile users, but the definition of done basically means whenever you are done with one of your user stories. And if testing is not a formal part of the definition of done, and you can say, hey, my user story is complete because I finished it and I deployed it, but I didn't test it, then testing becomes an irrelevant part of the process. If testing is part of the definition of done, and if the testing part of this user story is the responsibility of someone who's not a tester, then this person will still be accountable, and people will start asking him or her what's happening with this part of the session. And again, testing will become a little bit more important than if it was not a part of your definition of done. Okay, so it might sound like a dirty trick, but it's a very important part of the commitment of management in making testing part of the process within the team. Okay? Now I see a couple of additional questions. I will go ahead and answer them as part of the Q&A, okay? Now, even after we made all the planning and preparation, even after we actually adapted our testing, and even after we understood what's going on with our developers, there's still going to be a number of pitfalls that we need to keep our eyes open because they will happen. And when they happen, you want to be able to act as quickly as you can in order to correct these, let's say, faulty actions from your development team. The most common pitfalls that I've seen, again, obviously there are countless, but the ones that I already know and I'm constantly looking into them to make sure that they're not happening to me as much as I can is, well, the pitfall that I call, hey, your developer comes and says, hey, you know what, I really want to test, but I have more important tasks to do. Again, here, I cannot stress this enough. Management will define the priorities. If management doesn't come and says, hey guys, testing is part of your job, you need to do it. If that developer can actually comes to their team lead and say, hey, I need either to do this testing task or that development task, and the team lead doesn't stand right and says, hey, you have your testing task, go ahead and do it. Someone else will do your development task. Then it's not going to happen. If testing becomes a second-class job, it will never be a job that people will do. So unless management defines your priorities, you won't be able to walk the talk, okay? Whenever you hear someone say, hey, you know what, they'd really like to test, but I don't know how to test, remember, you need to go ahead and teach them and guide them. Never do it for them. It's very easy for us. I remember someone says, hey, you know what, I'd really like to test this, but it will take me ages. I don't know how to test it. Can you go ahead and do it? And I knew that if I was to go ahead and do that test, it will take me 15 minutes, 30 minutes tops. And if I needed to go ahead and sit with this person, it would be 2 to 3 hours. Again, you're not doing it for this time. You're doing it for the next time and the next time and the next time around. So if someone doesn't know how to do something, guide them, teach them. Do not do it for them. And if you have kids at home, then you know what I'm talking about. If you don't teach them how to do the stuff, you will end up doing it for them all the time. Whenever you hear someone say, hey, you know what? You asked me to test, I'm done testing. Great. You might want to take their word for it, but I still recommend you go ahead and do a peer review, you do a walkthrough. You will see that many times, even though whenever that developer thinks that they are, quote unquote, done testing, they might not be really done all the testing that you expected them to do. So review their work, walk through their work. Don't make it don't make it as if, hey, I know that you don't know how to test, so I'm gonna go over whatever you did. No, you're actually saying to them, hey, you know what? I know that you're new to testing, and even if you were new to testing, it's a best practices we have in here. Let's take 5 minutes and let's do a peer review. Let's go over what you did. Let's make sure that you didn't miss something that is really important. Let me go over your findings. All those walkthroughs or those peer reviews are part of that ongoing process to teach them stuff. By the way, it also means that you're giving testing the seriousness that it deserves in order to be a serious work. So if you're peer reviewing everything they did, or at least the most important parts, you're basically showing them that it's a complex stuff and you really want them to do it correctly. Okay, so I think that is one of the most important things, especially when you have people who are just starting to test. And again, if we go back into the people who want to get stuff done, and let's not call them lazy, but we might as well do it. Whenever you get someone says, hey, can you come and help me to do this? And again, it's not the first time that you're doing a pair testing session, but it's that person who cannot do anything by themselves. Remember, point to resources, ask questions. Do not always go ahead and hold their hands because you will create a dependency. You also want to make sure that people understand they can also test by themselves. You will be here every time to answer their questions. You will be here to point them on the right direction, but you're not here in order to do that task for them, okay? Especially if I don't want to do something, it might be easier for me just to drag you along into it. It might be, quote unquote, less boring for me. But if you are going to be leading quality and leading testing on your team instead of doing testing on your team, that you will need to put the point where you say, hey, you know what? Over here, you know where the resources are. Go ahead and take a look into it. Once you're done, I will peer review whatever you did and we can walk through your steps. Okay, so this is all part of how do you actually help them to become better testers on their own accounts instead of doing all the testing for themselves. Now, a point that I talked about before, and I think that it's very, very important. And again, I'm a strong believer in visibility and communications. Okay, I do believe that whenever you want to do a change in any environment, a change in any process, visibility and correct communications are actually the key for that. Okay, and as I mentioned before, if you are given visibility into the tasks that need to be done and you show that someone is becoming a bottleneck for them, then that person will automatically feel uncomfortable for being the bottleneck, and he or she will basically stop being that bottleneck. If you're doing a team effort and you show that all the team other than two people are actually pulling their weight on the testing task, and these two people will start pulling their weight on the testing task. It's not about competing. It's not about shaming someone. I really don't believe in shaming, but it's about showing people that everyone is equal and everyone has their tasks. And if I'm able to make this visible, then I'm going to be able to basically make more people be part of the team. And again, sometimes it's needed. If you will need to have management intervene in one or two specific people in your teams, it's better to have all that information there so they won't be surprised when management comes and says, hey, how come you're not pulling your weight on the testing part of the task as we requested for that? So again, I don't really know what system you're using, if you're using a system at all. But I do believe that it's very, very important for you to have the correct dashboards that are going to be showing, okay, so which test cases have been run, who has been running your test cases. If you go into, for example, and you can give visibility into the specific actions within the testing that is being done by each one of your testers, or if you're showing, again, the different test cases or the bugs that are assigned to people, all of that named visibility will really, really, really create accountability. The same goes if you're using some sort of task board. And again, this is the dashboard that we have in PractiTest, and I mentioned that before. And one of the reasons that we added this dashboard is because we believe that there's not enough accountability and visibility on the testing tasks. And so by adding this dashboard within PractiTest that will show the different tests that people need to run and different requirements that are assigned to people and even the bugs that are assigned to people, we will generate that visibility and that accountability. So that is something that will help to generate better communication throughout the team. So if you already have a system in place, it can be Excel, it can be a Kanban board, it can be, I don't know, Post-it notes on the windows on your office. Make sure that you also have accountability and visibility into the testing tasks that are being done here. Okay, so it's one of the most important things that you need to do as part of your process. And again, this is only how it works in PractiTest, but you can take a look into any other number of systems and get something that will also help you with that. So to summarize the points that we talked about before, and again, I want to drive this point as much as I can. I think that developers want to help. I think that there is a bad name to testing around the developer community, and that is something that is slowly changing as we have more and more developers taking part of the testing task. And now it is our job to make those developer tests better and to test more professionally and to find the real important bugs so that they appreciate the importance of their testing tasks. And I think that the best ways to do this is if you follow, obviously, the parts where you know that, first of all, it's not that developers cannot test. Again, it's not rocket science, but we really, really need management to push this effort. If it doesn't start from management, your chances of succeeding are not nil, but they're going to be very, very close to nil. Unless the management comes and says, hey guys, everyone will test because everyone's accountable for quality, then it simply won't happen. Now, every new tester, including developers, will need training and guidance. You will need to take the time in order to pair test with them. You will need to have the preparations in place in order to help them with checklists and heuristics for that. It will make their lives easier and their testing a lot better. Make sure that you have all your infrastructure. And again, it's not a simple thing to do, but it's a very cost-effective thing to do, is to have good enough environments so they can deploy whenever they need to. If we're talking about projects or if we're talking about containers of all different sorts of things, go ahead and do them. If your developers can actually use them on deployment when they start working, it will be easier for them to find the important bugs on the system. There will be pitfalls. You will have issues. It won't run smoothly. It never does. It never will. So make sure that you know about those pitfalls up front and then you're ready to correct them. okay, to work on them and to help your developers to do a better job. And remember that the easiest way to make any change, this specific change, obviously, it's going to be to have good communication, make sure that everyone has complete visibility, and in that case, we'll also have good accountability into what's going on as part of their testing projects. Okay, so if I need to summarize this, remember, it will be a change that you will need to push forward, but it's something that is doable. Many of us are already doing it. We see quite a lot of good traction on this front, but you do need to understand that this is going to be a process that you will need to lead, and this might be the keys for you to lead it. So what I want to do right now is actually go ahead and open the floor for Q&A. So I'm going to start by going over a couple of questions that people already asked, and let me go over them right now. Are there any resources that you recommend for pair testing for learning, like Code Mentor for testing, for example? I think that the best way to do pair testing is simply to go ahead and do it, but not, as I mentioned before, it's not to sit the person as you're testing and tell them, look into what I'm doing, and next time you will be able to do it yourself. It's more about, hey, you should be part of the whole process that I'm doing right now. Sit with them and walk them through how do you analyze that user story. Many times what I like to do is to show them, hey, you know what, whenever I start testing, I try to look first of all by all bugs that were found. So go over all of those parts with them. Make sure that you do the whole process, especially the preparation process. Then go ahead and run the test cases with them all the time. Make sure that you tell them what you're doing. And then whenever I do walkthrough sessions, I never do one. I usually do either 3 or 4. The first one I will do myself when I will be guiding. The second one, I do ask them to start guiding. Maybe I do a third one where they're guiding. And that way I make sure that I can correct them in their own words. Okay, and that will be the best way simply to do a session of that way. We have another question here. Let me go over it for a second. Sometimes developers don't do full unit testing or impact analysis of the features. Asking here about Visual Studio. Guys, I think that, again, it's true that many times even the unit testing the developers should be doing let's say on a more straightforward approach, even that they don't really do. I think that once we start teaching developers and teaching the organization that the responsibility for testing, the responsibility for quality, it's for everyone, then even the unit test will become better. Okay, it's not about the tools that you have for code analysis or code coverage. I think that it's more about responsibility and accountability. Okay, so once people start understanding that this is a cultural approach, that it's not that you're asking them to test, it's that it is their responsibility to test, then it will become a little bit better to do like this. Okay. Is there a better way to persuade your manager to do this? Well, it really depends. I think that most cases where we're seeing developers starting to do tests is whenever you get a manager to say, hey, you know what, from now on, we're going to be working agile, or we're going to be implementing a DevOps approach. Many times people don't really understand what's behind those words. And it might be an issue for you, let's say as a tester within the team, to go over your VPRND and explain to them that, well, part of the decision to go agile means that everyone is going to be responsible for testing. So we need to get more developers to do more tests. So if you're not able to persuade them on that, try to get other people in your team who did learn about that around Agile, that other people need to be part of their testing in the organization to do it. Many times whenever you're getting implementing Agile, then you're going to be having Agile consultants. So try to use those people to help you persuade your manager about it. But it is an act of persuading. And if you have a manager that has the wrong idea or again, completely erroneous idea of what Agile means or how to implement that, or the fact that, well, testing needs to be done, and if you have less testers, you will need to have other people doing the testing, then you might run into an issue. So try to get as much people from the team as you can doing it. And again, sometimes it's a very, very long battle, but you will need to fight it because there's no real chance of anything else. Let's see, we have quite a lot of questions. Does the same also count if designers or concept test mainly CI or CD? Not sure what a conceptors are, but I think that anyone on the team can actually be part of the testing. I've seen places where we have product owners doing quite a lot of the testing. It only means that you have other people who are not used to testing doing part of your testing, and the same applies for everyone. Okay, if you have anyone who's not doing testing, taking part of your testing aspects, then it will be better for you to go over the same type of approach with them. Maybe the pitfalls will be different, but you do want to have, whenever you have non-testers doing testing, try to make sure that you go over at least some of the same principles that we saw before. Do you have any strategies, again, to get management on board on the importance of testing? If your management doesn't understand the importance of testing, I'm not sure that you're in the right place as a tester. Either they get it that testing needs to be done and it's an important task, and either they understand that developers will need to do more of the testing and they approve that, or you might not be on the right place, because if you're going to be having less testers working on more teams and deploying more stuff outside the box, then you won't be able to do your job correctly. So I think that we need to explain to management. I think that we need to share with them stuff like this presentation or any other type of resources to make sure that they understand what the organization is in for. Maybe you want to wait for a couple of iterations to show how whenever you're releasing stuff outside, then you're running into risk of releasing quite a lot of bugs. And if management doesn't get it, then personally, I would start looking for other management to work on there. Okay, because sometimes we need to accept it. Sometimes manager doesn't really know what you're doing. And if that's the case, maybe you should look for other management to work with. I think that we have time for 2 more questions. So let me, again, I will try to choose one. I like this one. Is there any risk for tester to become irrelevant if developers start testing their own old type of testing? I would say this is kind of those questions that, wait a second, if developers are going to be doing all the tester, does that mean the testing is dead? No, definitely not. But, and there is a big but, I think that the role of the tester is changing. And I did a webinar about that, I think, about 2 months ago, and I've written about that quite a lot. I think that if you are a tester that you are only doing manual testing, if you're not doing any other type of additional tasks, maybe working with production, maybe trying to work on logs, maybe doing instrumentation. If you're part of an agile team and the only contribution that you have to your team is manual testing, then you might be on the risk of not being hired by that team anymore. One of the cool things about agile teams is that everyone needs to know how to do quite a lot of stuff. So if your only contribution to your team is manual testing, you might not have a job on that team for long. So I don't think that there's not going to be room for testers, but I strongly believe that the role for the tester is changing. It might not be changing in every organization at once. It might take 10, 15 years, 20 years. Maybe everyone who's on this webinar will still have a job testing, but I am certain that in 20 years' time, the role of the average tester will be very different from the role that I had 20 years ago or the role that we have today. So as more and more people are doing testing, I think that we will become more test leads or test architects, but that also means that we will have quite a lot of additional time that we'll need to spend doing other stuff. What other stuff? I don't know. It really depends on you. But you will need to start broadening your horizons on other stuff. Maybe writing a little bit of code, maybe working more in production environments, maybe knowing how to deploy stuff. The sky's the limit. Look for stuff that you can actually do correctly and try to do that kind of stuff. But the role of testing, as we know it today, is definitely changing. And one of the reasons why it's changing is because we have more people doing testing today than we had before. Last question. How can developers go about finding pair testing partners so they can learn skills before going for a company as an employer and intern? That's a great question. I think that, first of all, there are quite a lot of learning courses. If you're a developer and you want to make sure that as part of your curriculum, you also know how to learn, how to test, go ahead and try it by yourself. Okay, if you want to, there are quite a lot of crowdsourcing testing companies that will hire you and will give you tasks for free. You won't be doing a lot of pair testing there, but you will be doing testing. And then when you get to a company and you have done pair testing or have you been doing testing, then you will have a broader curriculum that you can show for everyone to be part of. So as a developer, I think the testing skills are great skills to have. And today there are quite a lot of resources. And if you want to then send me an email, I'll send you a couple of links that you can actually go over later on. Guys, sorry, we don't have time to go over all the questions, so sorry for leaving that out. First thing that I want to do is we're going to be having another webinar. I'm not sure that everyone can see this, but it's going to be on October the 8th, and I'm very, very honored of having James Bach, who I've known for a number of years. We'll be talking about exploratory testing. We will have a live Q&A session around exploratory testing. So first thing first, go ahead to practice.com, webinars, exploratory testing, and sign up for that session. Once you sign up, you can send us your questions, send them up front, you can send them during the session themselves, and we will be reviewing quite a lot of different topics around exploratory testing. So again, if you don't know who James Bach is, this guy basically, together with Ken Canner, they developed and perfected exploratory testing a number of years ago. He's still one of the most, talented testers that I know. And we will be talking exploratory testing. That is in less than a month from now. And last but not least, if you have any questions, please feel free to send them to me. My email address is joel@practice.com. I don't answer all emails soon or fast enough, but I do answer all emails. You can look me up on Twitter, or you can go over my blog at qablog.practice.com. Thank you very much for everyone who actually joined this session. I hope that it was fruitful and that you enjoyed it. And again, we're here to help if there's anything we can do from you. So this is Joel from PractiTest, thanking you very much. I hope you have a great day, great week, great evening, and we will be in touch soon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.